Hey everybody, welcome to Rev'd Up for Sunday. We're the clergy of St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut, and I'm Peter Walsh.
I'm Elizabeth Garnsey.
I'm John Kennedy.
And I'm Robert Willis. I'm the visitor here and for a short time, and glad to be joining you for this particular podcast.
As you can tell, we have a most humble servant of our Lord, a superstar in our world, Robert, Dean Emeritus of Canterbury Cathedral, pastor to the Garden congregation. COVID went viral, and so did you. And your viralness made you, in my mind, along with Archbishop Rowan, the best ambassador for the Anglican way in the world today.
Thank you. Thanks.
And so having you with us is sweet.
That's good.
Yes. And today we also have Jesus with us. 2 or 3 are gathered together in his name. We are gathered, and as you can see, we're not gathered at St. Mark's Episcopal Church. We're here at the Berkeley Divinity School at Yale, St. Luke's Chapel, where the 3 people from St. Mark's went to seminary, and we're back visiting our old haunt. So today, Jesus takes on competitive Christianity. Here's the gospel. It's Mark 10:35-45. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to Jesus and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And he said to them, "What is it you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your glory." But Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" They replied, "We are able." Then Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink, you will drink, and with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those whom it has been prepared." Well, when the 10 heard this, they began to be angry with James and John. So Jesus called them and said to them, "You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as the rulers lord it over them, as their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. But whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Okay, so here we are back in this section of Mark where we're on the way with Jesus teaching his disciples, and we're coming to the end of the on the wayness, and Jesus is taking on one thing after another, and now today we get ambition.
Yes, we do. And we get James and John sort of, this passage might be worth saying comes on the heels of the third passion prediction of Jesus, and James and John are sort of saying, "Can't we talk about something more pleasant?" And it's such a non sequitur that they would come right in with this request on the heels of Jesus telling them about his death and suffering.
All the more because it seems like they just had this conversation.
Right.
In the previous chapter, in Mark chapter 9, the disciples are arguing amongst themselves about who is the greatest. And Jesus gives them what is largely the same response. So it's a retread, and right. After that teaching and after the intervening events and Jesus' interaction with the rich young man and saying you must receive the kingdom of God like a child if you want to receive it at all, they still don't get it. At least James and John don't get it. It's kind of funny.
I think it's strange how little they hear, although they're listening in this formation that we've seen growing through in the journey. And I think it must have been a catastrophic disappointment to Jesus that these two, who are by tradition members of his own family, coming up and saying this as though everything he's been telling them, showing them, and everything else has just gone right over their heads, and they're coming up with all kinds of wrong ideas of glory and what's waiting for them in Jerusalem. But at the same time, the church knew it pretty quickly that this was shameful behavior. So the next 2 Gospels who tell the story ask the mother to ask the question.
That's true. That's true. Yeah.
So they're excused, but poor mother has to carry the can, which is extraordinary. That's Luke and Matthew.
They give him the old Jewish mother thing, advocating for her kid.
That's right. But this
her kids.
marks the earliest, and clearly is the fact that they felt necessary to make that correction is really important.
Right.
I used to really judge this sort of thing. I don't judge it at all any longer, in that I'm more and more convinced that boys are hardwired in middle school, and they're hardwired to be hierarchical and competitive. And the undoing of that is it takes the Lord Jesus to seek to undo that. But this stuff gets wired in, and it is really clearly hard to get rid of.
Bringing the gendered aspect into this makes me think of. First of all, Jesus as such a remarkable man, right? Because he was strong, he was grounded, he was confident, he was magnetic, but he wasn't beholden to these power games. He was chasing after status, etc. It makes me think of something that Richard Rohr said. I think he described Jesus once as a female soul in a male body. I guess sort of into gender essentialism that I don't necessarily want to hang my hat on, but it's an interesting thing to think about, that he was a very strong man, but a very different kind of man.
Yeah, what do you make of that?
I think that's all the things that have been said are so compelling and interesting. I've never really, been conscious of the idea that Matthew and Luke would have been a correction to put it in the mouth of the mother.
Definitely,
and it's really offensive, actually. And it's really interesting. And I also find that the gender conversation is more archetypal than literal, because I think, as you mentioned, John, Jesus embodies the whole person, the whole personhood of God, which is genderless, but all things, united in him. And we're all meant to move into this fullness and have the strength and confidence of, the male way, plus the gentle inclusiveness of a female, sensibility or whatever it is. But he's so whole. And I think that we can't say, women wouldn't have done this same thing, because certainly they did too, and do.
This passage always takes me back to the Golden Jubilee of our late Queen, when the coronation coach was wheeled out at her 50th anniversary, and everything went right up to St. Paul's Cathedral, and I don't think it was a very comfortable coach to ride in, but that was the nation looking at this. And when they got there, she insisted that the gospel that was to be read was this.
Oh, wow.
And that those who in the Gentiles lord it amongst them as their great ones, but it must not be so with you.
Oh, wow.
Amongst you, they must be your minister, your servant. And it was so clearly focused on her sense of what it meant to be the monarch representing a ministering authority at that time.
Very beautiful.
Incredibly beautiful. I wonder if you might say a little bit more about this. I mean, we have in lived out in the story, and we have lived out in the church also. I mean, the Queen's faith life. I know Rowan Williams has written a bit about that I've read, and how powerful that is. And we have this in the church. I wonder if you might comment, where we have people who have high jobs in the ecclesiastical hierarchy, and how it is that one's humility might be at service in the hierarchy and not let the hierarchy take their head away. Do you have any sense of that or thoughts on that?
Very much so. Yes, I think that it is one of the greatest temptations of all to see our vocation to a sacramental ministry, which is spread right across the church in different dimensions, and we as Episcopal Anglicans would see that as something, as a vocation, which is a way of life, not a ladder of ascension, because it doesn't work like that. I think the gifts need someone to discern that, and someone out of that picture to discern who should be holding an office which might be too great a temptation. You're into so many of Jesus's parables at that time.
Yeah.
And the rich ruler, which you've spoken about already last week, is someone who goes away, and Jesus is sad.
Yeah.
But clearly it would have been the wrong vocation at that time. Was pray that he came back a bit later. But who knows? There's so many bits of guesswork in this. And it's a lovely puzzle to be doing always, to take yourself back to the scripture. And no one better than Mark or John, because I think there are original sources in both those Gospels. And Matthew and Luke, make it acceptable reading and iron out some crinkles as well.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. The Mark in Jesus has a lot of elbows on the way we live our lives and go about our lives. And I think that, one of the things, Elizabeth, you've brought to us, I've made the boy comment before, and you're always saying it's not all about the boys, and Jesus, in all these cases, John has a great knowledge and experience in understanding not just the Christian tradition, but the Buddhist tradition, and that Jesus over and over is about the business here of detachment, detaching from everything but him. That's really what he's looking for. Detach and attach to me. That's the business he's about here.
Yeah.
Then go back to passages as in St. John to Nicodemus, a man of great power, and Jesus saying, "You're missing the point. You a scholar of the Jews say that unless you turn around and become like children, you won't even enter the kingdom of heaven."
Right.
That trust is essential.
Right. James and John are sort of children in a different way.
Absolutely.
They're childish.
Yes. But those they make the two of the trio that come to him to Gethsemane. So the lessons are soon learned when they go the other side of the mountain.
I think missing the point is a very illuminating frame for why what Jesus says here is so important. It's not as if Jesus calls us to renounce a game, a sort of power-seeking, ladder-climbing game, so we, give up something that might otherwise be fun and fulfilling just to be obedient to our Lord. No, Jesus is trying to turn us away from something that actually leads us nowhere, something that's absolutely a dead end, that has the appearance like a desert mirage of being something appealing and something sustaining, but is actually completely empty. That, so many people spend their lives climbing a ladder only to reach the top and realize it was leaning against the wrong wall. I don't remember who originated that phrase, but it's a very good image that Jesus is calling us, as you said, to a way of life that's certainly true of clergy, but it's true of all Christians. It's our baptismal identity and vocation to follow a way of life. And I want to underline life here, that what he's actually leading us to is our own greatest good and our own greatest joy.
I think the only ladder that matters in the gospel is the one that Jesus tells Nathanael that he will see the angels of God ascending and descending, and you're back with Jacob's dream at his most desolate, with his head on a stone. But the ladder reaches to heaven, not to positions of earthly power.
Oh,
That's
wow.
so good.
That's really, really good. I want to follow that up with the next question. That's beautiful. What do you make of this question? What is it that you want me to do for you?
I love that question because he also asks, in the next chapter,
Bartimaeus.
Healing of blind Bartimaeus, he'll ask the same thing. And they each give separate answers. Bartimaeus wants to be able to see, and that's just what Jesus wants them to be able to do. And so I think that's not by accident that Mark puts that question to both of these scenarios.
So you go back to the old-fashioned thing with Bartimaeus, that he received his sight and followed Jesus on the way, the first word that described Christians.
Right.
And it was a blind man who saw and followed on the way.
I think one thing about Mark is that it's framed from the beginning around Isaiah 6 and, the people who have eyes but cannot see and ears that cannot hear. And throughout this gospel, we have Jesus healing blind men and deaf people on the heels of every sort of teaching moment. And in we get Bartimaeus next, and he really wants his disciples to see and hear. And I think the implication is eventually as you mentioned, they're healed. They are healed of that. But
Well, speaking of the eventual, spiritual progress of the disciples, Jesus also speaks to their future suffering, that at this time they don't understand and are not prepared for the cup that Jesus will drink and the baptism with which he will be baptized, which is, of course, his death, his passion. But that later they will drink it. They will be baptized in this way. So for me, this is perhaps the most challenging part of the passage that, I said a moment ago that Jesus is inviting us, calling us into a way of life, capital L, but surely enough, that way, that path, at least for the apostles, led first through tremendous suffering and hardship. So what do we make of that as Christians now?
Well, I think that I just want to circle back half a step before I say a word about that, John. I think you're right on it with that. That's a significant question for all of us, is this question of what is it that you want me to do for you, which I think you can blow over quickly. But my experience of that, every time I preach about that people at the back door don't know how to answer the question.
Okay.
They cannot answer the question. They do not know what they want Jesus to do for them. And that I think that this alone, if you're looking for the question of to plumb your spiritual life and to understand the life of your soul, is to not let that question slink away, is to stay with that question, because until we have clarity about our who we are-ness and what our desires are, we cannot be detached from that which is wrong in our attachments until we can actually articulate, this is what I want. And then if you can say, this is what I want, and then you can put it up against what you sometimes talk about, Elizabeth, which is the whole of the witness of Jesus, and then how does what I want come forward to the whole of the witness of what Jesus has to say, not just any one sentence here or any one event here. And that is really the first question. And that the second question is, when in Mark's gospel, for sure, the question of what is the Dharma, what's the teaching? And the teaching is this servanthood, but suffering. This, you want to make progress up the ladder, the divine suffering. And so back to your question here, what are we to do with suffering? Because who says the one thing I want in the center of my soul is suffering, besides St. Francis of Assisi? I mean, who's going in that place?
I think I don't think anyone would say it. They get it through experiencing it and finding that God's answer at that time is giving them new dimensions of faith, but it's a painful process. And each time the questions and everything else comes after the teaching, it's in threes. There was 3 times Jesus tells them this truth on the way up, and 3 times, I don't know what he felt when they clearly showed that they had absolutely no understanding of what he's said. And in the same way, these James and John and Peter are the ones who 3 times in the Garden of Gethsemane, that privileged position of going forward, he comes back and finds them asleep. That it's a devastating thing when you're teaching people and they're just, their eyes are shut, because their human tiredness has taken it over. And then in the end, at the lakeside, none of that in Mark because it ends with the tomb. But afterwards, in the Johannine thing, it's 3 times he has to say it to Peter at that restoration. Yeah. But I don't think it's something anybody would say, I want to go out and embrace suffering. I think they go out with an intention of standing beside people who are suffering. And then when they begin to experience it, new dimensions of gifts seem to be given to these people.
Oh, beautiful.
We could tell so many stories about that.
Yeah, of course. I don't think Jesus is saying so much that, they have to seek out suffering as that it's inevitable. Yeah. And if they really put themselves in the path of, this way of countering the power dynamics of our world, suffering is inevitable. And we have to be brave enough and willing enough to just stand there and be in solidarity with all the victims of that and become one ourselves.
Absolutely.
And that's transformative. And so I think the misunderstanding throughout the ages has been that, self-flagellation and suffering like Christ, it was some sort of physical
that's
state.
Attached to the fact that the body is evil.
Right.
And has to be subdued.
Very contorted.
But that I think is not a doctrine I'd adhere to at all.
Right.
I think body, mind, and spirit are all sanctified by making us human.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree on that. I think, we have as a centerpiece of our world an incarnational theology, and I think Christianity has amongst the worst incarnational spiritualities. That we really didn't connect theology and spirituality here, and we find that many people in the world, as they begin to awaken to the fullness of the issues that we have in our physicality and our spirituality together, they look in Christianity and they find a dearth of teaching, and so they find themselves looking to other traditions that embrace a completely different understanding of the body, particularly in the East, where they're, the Hindu tradition and the question of energy systems and Tai Chi and all these things that we just didn't go that route, and certainly the mortification of the flesh during the Middle Ages we would now find abhorrent.
So speaking of embodied practice and incarnational spirituality, Dean Robert, you are a pilgrimage man, right? As Dean of Canterbury Cathedral, you were the leader of a great pilgrimage destination, a great pilgrimage starting point, and now you are very involved in the Camino de Santiago. And I'm very interested, just in light of what Peter was just saying, about how you've experienced and witnessed pilgrimage as an embodied, sort of vivifying spirituality.
That's opening up quite a big area.
Yeah.
But I think I would answer that by saying that the concept of the journey, the way, is something that is quite simply understood, and that people on pilgrimage, they're quite difficult answers to give when you say to them, why did you go on pilgrimage? And sitting, and Fletcher is here, having just done a pilgrimage from Ferrol to Santiago. But what I was going to say is, when we meet in the hostel that we've opened for pilgrims in Santiago, it's wonderful to have the different answers given, but many of them say, well, I don't know really, I just felt called to journey along that route. And then you get a lovely story told of painful feet and loneliness and bad weather, but yet there's this sort of glory of feeling we've accomplished the journey. But the truth is, of course, that every earthly journey is the beginning of the next. The end of the one leads on to the other, but you carry the suffering of body in pilgrimage, and so to see life as a journey has been something of the best spiritual writers in this way. But it's body, mind, and spirit all suffering and being brought together and healed by the most unexpected encounters to friends you would never have made. They're not the sort of person I would have made friends with, and now we've become the best of friends. And it's a spiritual conversation which is going on, as well as a hard physical journey. But both feed into each other.
Yeah. So much of that is the treasure that Jesus talks about, in the life to come or the age to come,
Absolutely.
that we can't, I guess that's for next week's gospel, but, he's not saying have no more desires. Like you said, we're not asked to give up everything joyful to be faithful, but Jesus has a whole different way to look at it, and that the richness comes in the shedding of all our trappings and needs and the wrongful desires and stuff like that.
Yeah, and as we're saying, I mean, we're taking a little snippet out of a long story here, and Jesus on the road to Jerusalem here, and that they are on pilgrimage. These are people going to the holy times, and that Jesus is going to arrive in the Passover, and that they're traveling, and just like walking on the Camino, there's an on the moveness of it. And I think that one of the things that happens on the Camino is that while you're busy, there's a lot of steps. Let me just say that. It's a lot of steps. Yeah. And the streams are beautiful and this, but what happened is, you said, strangers become friends. And it's like talking to somebody on an airplane. You would never tell your closest people what's in the depths of your soul. You see some stranger and you say, you want to know what's going on with me? I'll tell you. Yep. And you unfold all this stuff. And that you find on the way that people unfold the depths of their souls with you. and you move immediately to a kind of intimacy that then breaks apart because they walk faster than you do, or something like that.
But you meet up again.
Yes,
yeah.
and I think that that's what's happening here in the scene, that this is a they, we're going to hear that next week, but they are walking along, and so we have Jesus, his close followers, and then we have these other pilgrims on the move, many of whom are Jesus followers, and Jesus is walking and he's hearing, and we get that in today's story, where he's walking along and he says something like, he pulls him to the side. Every time Jesus hears something and he takes him over and says, we got to talk about this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he's constantly trying to teach him on the way.
The time's running short for him to form these disciples as the.
Yeah.
I didn't mean our time's running short, but it's. I think it's an important thing also to set apart the evangelists. Because each one makes themselves known by the story they're telling and what they choose to include and what they don't. So the worst thing you can do is conflate.
Yeah, agree.
And we've spoken a lot in our pods about the Markan community and the suffering issues for his Mark being a him, as we assume, in Rome, and the emphasis on Jesus. And we're moving toward such a significant portion of the gospel being that around Jesus' last week of his life. As we start to kind of come toward the end of this, what I am curious about, since we have the treasure of having you with us, I wonder if you would unfold, or if you could just give us any insight into the life of your soul, the things that you find in the season of life that you're in that are that have become treasure to you through time. You have served in so many different ways. You're the chaplain to everything in the world, as far as I can tell, and you have about the most beautiful partnership, and we want to sit at your feet, and that's why your YouTube channels keep going, and your roosters are still popular, and your cats are more popular than most religious leaders in the world. And just if you could just share with us something that is the way you see the life of your soul now.
No, okay. Well, I think the biggest surprise is how sharp early memories become, and how suddenly you will be reminded in situations of something that you were taught by somebody who at the time you probably thought, well, I don't understand what they're saying, and it comes into sharp relief. And that's one of the lovely things about growing older. It gives you more space because you're slower, but at the same time the images are brighter, so that no word that has been told you in the past that was meant to be a treasure of spirituality is lost. It's there. And the eyes of all these people through different sorts of ministry, parish ministry, cathedral ministry across the world, I think the animals help people to be childlike again, and to in the middle of a story to laugh, but realize the story is going on. We never stopped if something was happening. I mean, an animal was behaving as they should be, and the garden was unfolding itself seasonally. And I think I see life as a journey which is seasonal, so that as one comes to the winter journey, there are sprigs of spring in that which are quite different, but they come. And so I treasure this time. And we happened to find gifts that we could share in your skill with the camera and what a thing looks like. But I said in the sermon here last night, the most important thing that you ever said to me on camera quite early on, and said, just be yourself, because people sense deep within them if you're being yourself, whereas if you're trying to make a confection which fits, quite often it doesn't fit. And the most extraordinary people have helped you on the way, and books and bits of poems and bits of hymns and everything else. But to have a knapsack of spiritual sayings which are yours is a really important thing, because there are times when it's so hard you don't want to read a book, but the memory is there that comes back, and sentences which help in those ways. So I think one of our favorites was given to me when I was leaving Hereford to go. I'd been sent to Canterbury, which was not the easiest decision to make, but there was no way around it, because in those days there were no interviews or anything, you just went through. And an old lady, a lovely old lady, put into my hand a little piece of paper on which she had scribed in biro, "The will of God will not lead you where the grace of God cannot keep you."
Oh, wow.
And it was the most beautiful gift. So from this lady who was, nobody much counted. So
Beautiful.
Well, that's impossible to follow, I think. Either of you have a last word to bring here?
I mean, I love to think that the disciples came to that same insight. Obviously, they did. And everything Jesus said to them came flooding back in a different light, in a different time.
Beautiful.
I'm sure.
Beautiful.
And
Beautiful.
same for us, I guess. That's
Now
your
I see
bearing
what he
witness.
meant, is the thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It must have come to them in prison cells and everywhere. Now I see what he meant.
Yeah, I think can I say one more thing?
Yes,
I've
please.
sort of been on the tip of my tongue when you were talking about the animals and everything. And there's a wonderful author named Mark Brocker who wrote a book called Coming Home to Earth. And he is a Lutheran Norwegian. So, I'm a Norwegian, so I felt affinity to him. But he had this anxiety about, has he done enough to go to heaven? And he wrote this book exploring, what Jesus was really all about. And he ties this Mark 10 to Genesis 1.
Yeah.
And, this notion that we have dominion over the earth. And we've taken it as a license to dominate. Right. And he gets to Mark 10 to say, James and John are asking for domination. And the other disciples are angry with them because they want a piece of the domination too, and they got to Jesus first or whatever. But Mark Brocker, the author, he talked about this spirit of domination versus the spirit of service that Jesus is trying to lead them into, and that Jesus actually dies for the whole of the creation, not just the people.
Yeah.
And, our domination over the earth has just been a scourge. And, the death and resurrection of Jesus is meant to restore the whole of creation. And, the animals being the animals, it's just so beautiful what
Being
you said.
themselves, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's the transformation that Jesus is trying to get into these two, into all of us, but his followers in the moment. So I just wanted to add that as a footnote to your beautiful image. Yeah.
Well, both your insights are incredibly beautiful. Both that there's the remembrance here, and when I hear what you said and what you said, I'm thinking that Mark's gospel is, at least in my not scholarly opinion, that these are Peter's memories put down by Mark, gathered together, and so we have here the sharpening through time of the particularity of Jesus, maybe through Mark's filter and Peter's filter and all that, but nonetheless incredibly alive to us now.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So building off of what you just said, Elizabeth, and tying it back into Dean Robert, what you said about, being yourself.
Yeah.
And tying it back to what you said, what do you want me to do for you? Jesus asked all of us that question. I'm hearing it now in light of all this incredible wisdom that you've all shared, as Jesus offers, kind of wants us to come to the realization that the best thing we can ask him to do for us is to help us, come into our true selves, to truly be ourselves. And what James and John at this point in their lives and this point of the story, what they want is actually the building up, the aggrandizement of the false self, right? The dominion-seeking self that wreaks havoc. But Jesus really, the only thing Jesus can really do for us is release us from that. And that road does inevitably lead through suffering, because it requires sort of the breaking up of our attachments and our illusions, which I thought you touched on very well in your comments about pilgrimage. But yeah, this is a passage about Jesus offering one thing, something very true and very good, but also difficult, and the disciples at this point missing it, but getting it later.
Yeah.
So there's always hope there.
Mark is the only one who names Bartimaeus.
Yeah.
So it was important to his, sense that this is the one Bartimaeus.
Yeah.
It's just a blind man in the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so, again, I'm instead of landing the plane here, as Rob always wants us to do, I sometimes, we're sort of stumbling on some stuff that is very rich for us coming off of your reflections. When I was on pilgrimage last year and these guys heard the story, so I won't bore anybody with it, but I received a vision, and in the vision, the smile of the divine gaze upon my being and to the depths of my soul and into the cellular level. And in that, I experienced being loved in a way that I had never loved myself. And I had the experience of realizing that I had wasted a tremendous portion of my life trying to make other people think I was impressive or to get them to like me or to strive for this or that it was okay just to be me. And it was a phenomenally freeing experience. And John, you're tying that into what does he want me to do for you? And you're talking about this, the season that you're in. And it seems to me the sooner that we can get to a season where we plain old accept ourselves for who we are and that we embrace that and love that into being, the better we are, the better the world is, because innate and embedded in that, to follow the way of Jesus as the road, the path to that. That's the key. That's the soul key that we're talking about.
It started like that with childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And then, it comes round in a circle to that again.
Incredibly beautiful. Well, again, we are so grateful to have you with us on this podcast, and so grateful that you and Fletcher are going to come and be at St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut. This is not a day you want to miss, and because it's very special for us to be in your presence and for you to bring the gospel incarnate in the way that you guys live. And we all learn the grace upon grace that flows from you. We want to get somewhere near the hem of your garment, and so to go from grace upon grace and strength upon grace, we're going to go from Dean upon Dean. We've got Dean Robert with us, and next week we're going to have Dean Andrew McGowan, the Dean of the Berkeley Divinity School at Yale, and he's Australian, and he's going to bring some of his own heat too. So we hope you'll join us for that also. So peace be with you. God bless you.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Thank you. It's been wonderful. Thank you.